Hey everybody, DJ here. This is the final part of our Fireball Simulations in Blender series. So we're going to be looking at how to do all of the final render settings and compositing for still frame image renders, animations, and we're also going to be doing some EXR image sequences so that you can do these in a compositing program like Nuke, Natron, or Fusion in DaVinci Resolve. Okay, everybody, let's go ahead and jump into Blender here. And what we're going to do is we're just going to go over some basic render settings to make sure that we can get this thing going pretty quickly. I know that a lot of people don't have as high powered of a computer as I do, so I'm going to try and give you some really nice tips on how to make yours render really quick. So, first, what we're going to do is I'll just quickly show you what my scene looks like. So this is the frame I chose, and this is what the materials look like. If I zoom in here, you can see I have my sparks, I have my smoke, and I have my fire all set up. And there's my wall there. I have my lighting in the scene and everything. So first what we're going to do is we're going to go over here, and we're actually going to remove the background. It's very common, if not, main practice, that when you are creating scenes, especially stuff like this, you're going to be compositing it into something else. You don't want to spend time rendering a background that's going to get replaced or that you might want to change later. So what we're going to do here is we're going to go over to our render settings, and we're going to go down to where it says film, and we're going to click this right here that says transparent. So click that on, and you'll see right there, now the background has become transparent. And what I would recommend doing is, if you do want to have a white background later or a different color, test it. If I take off the transparency, I go to the world settings and I change this color to something like this color here, and change the background strength. You can see how hard it is to see that smoke. So you might want to change your settings. So here's white, for example. So you can see how hard it is to see this smoke in a white background. But with the black, it looks really cool. So for me, I'm going with black, but if you're going with a white background, change your settings to a white, make your smoke and your fire, change it around to what you want it to look like. And then from that point there, I'm just going to change this to a black and turn the strength off, and then go to my the film settings here in render, and click it off. But it's really up to you on what you want to do with that background. I just wanted to show you that tip just in case you were planning on doing something else, like a bright color or a white in the background. You might want to change your materials a little bit to make it a little bit more visible. So that's basically what my scene looks like. Now, what we're going to do here is we're going to go to the render settings here, and we're going to make sure that render region is selected and click on our camera. And then I'm going to use these little handles here, and I'm just going to pick one section. And we're just going to do some test renders on an area with some settings to see if that's what we want to go with for the rest of our scene. And the method that I'm showing you right now is something that I kind of had to learn for a while. And I used to have a very slow computer, and I would have to do this on my very, very large renders just to test how many samples and everything. So this method really is great. It works very well. So I'm just looking at this section right here where I have some smoke, I have some sparks, and I have some of the fire. And it's looking okay. So what we're going to do here is we're going to go to light paths, and right now it's set to these settings right here, and I'm in the new 3.0, by the way, which this is in 2.9 as well, so the newer 2.9. So if you're using 2.9, this also works. We're going to turn on fast GI approximation. Now this isn't going to be as accurate as this system here. However, fast GI is fast. So we're going to click that on. And right here where it says bounces and render bounces, render, I'm going to go to 0 because that will just copy whatever our viewport bounces are. And I'm going to click this up to maybe I don't know, 8 or something, maybe a 6, or, something like that. Something not quite a 1, but a little bit higher so we can get some more detail. So the other thing is volumes here. And I talked about this very briefly when we were creating our smoke and we were looking at it in the viewport. The settings here are going to change drastically how long it takes to render. If you take the max steps here and you increase these, it means that it's going to go through your volumes like kind of with a finer tooth comb. It's going to just sort of grab a little bit more detail out of it. And the viewport step rate here and the render step rates, these also will determine how fast this renders. So a lower value here, if I change this to like a zero point 0.2, for example, it's going to take a lot more time here to render, but it's supposed to be a lot more accurate. You're going to get a lot more fine details, and it's going to be a much more accurate render. However, it does take a long time, and for most people, that can be the difference between doing this whole thing or not. Is that your final render, if it takes 5 hours to do one frame, it's really not going to help you out a whole lot. So, what we're going to do here is we're going to take the viewport and we're going to jump it up to a 3 again. And you can see there it renders much, much faster. And the max step rate here, we're going to change this to a 50 because this is the lowest I believe it goes. I don't think you can go any lower. Oh, it looks like you can. So, but we're going to keep it at 50 for right now. And the step rate render, we're going to make this the same. Okay. And then I'm going to go ahead and we are going to render this out. So we're going to save and render that. Now, I did not mention, but I set my render settings to 200%, so this is technically a 4K render of this section that I'm doing right here. But you can leave it at 1920 by 1080 for now, just to see how things go. And you can see that I already have some really good results. I did change my samples, which I'll show you how to do in a second here, but I'm going to hit escape just to pause the rendering. And we're just going to take a look at this, and it looks pretty good. You know, I have some really nice detail. The flame looks pretty good, and I have my little sparks. But the sparks look just like little balls. They don't look like that there's really any motion or anything like that. It just kind of seems like they're just sort of hanging out there. So that's not super great. I'd like those to look better. And you'll notice here that there are you can see a little bit of that voxely stuff going on here. And what we're going to do is we're going to add a motion blur that's going to help with a lot of this voxel look and with making these look like they have more motion. So let's close this out. And I'm actually going to change this to a rendered view while I do stuff because if you, for some reason, if you have this in the rendered view, it's a lot more responsive. So we're going to go over here and I'll tell you what I did with my samples. So I changed this to 512 and you can actually add a noise threshold here where basically it will stop rendering a section once it achieves a certain noise level. Okay, so if we take this and we put this down to like a 0.003, sections will stop getting rendered which reach that noise threshold. So that's kind of up to you on where you want to set that. The higher the value, the more noisy your overall image is going to be, and we're not going to be using denoise on this because denoising actually kind of detracts from some of the good looking stuff in this render. You can try using it if you like, but I don't like to use it. And the max samples we're going to just leave at 512 for right now, and we'll just stop it when we feel like it. So the next thing that we're going to do before we kind of move forward here is down here to motion blur right here. We're going to check this on. And this starts off at default at around a 0.5, and you won't really see anything in your viewport for right now if you're using the your rendered setting here. And we're not going to deal with rolling shutter, but and then center on frame, we're just going to, or the position, we're just going to keep it on center on frame. And for the shutter, this really kind of depends on how fast your scene is. So we're going to just render this at a 0.5, and then we're going to change this a little bit to see if we want to increase or decrease this by comparing some renders. So let's hit F12 again, and we're going to let this render for a little bit, and we're just going to see what happens. Now, it will take a little bit longer because it has to build our scene now for multiple frames to calculate the motion of all of our elements. So it will take a little bit longer. You just have to be a little bit patient, and let's see what it looks like when this gets rendered out. So you can see here that it's loading, and there we go. So if we zoom in, you can see that now there's these really neat little trails that are on each of our sparks. And it's going to smooth out some of that like more voxely stuff here. And if this really bothers you, the like sort of voxel look, what you can do is you can increase the resolution on your original fire simulation and your noise part of the simulation that we went over earlier. But really in motion, this isn't going to be as obvious because you're going to be looking at it from like this far away, you know? And always with VFX and renders, I would say render 2 times what your final render is going to be. So you can see here, this is a 4K, right? So this is 4K on my screen because I have 4K monitors. If I zoom out, it's going to end up like somewhere like this as far as how tight everything's going to get, and you can't really tell that voxely look from this far away. Okay, so just FYI, that's why I'm not really worrying about that too much. So if we zoom in a little bit, we can see that we get some really cool effects here. It looks really nice. Now let's say that you wanted more. Okay, let's change this up here. At the top right, you have these different slots. So if we go to slot 2, and then we change this shutter to, let's say, a 1, okay? And let's actually change this viewport here to solid so that it's not taking up my render hardware. And let's hit F12 and see what this looks like after it's done. So again, it has to build, and we're adding frames for it to calculate the motion blur and everything. So you're going to get a little bit more time that this is going to take here. And we can always check. See here, it says last 1 minute and 5 seconds. So while this is building, we can actually check to see what the time difference is between our renders to see if it's worth it to add more or whatever. So let's let this render out. You can see already that these have much longer trails to them than the other one did. Looks like this actually took exactly the same amount of time, so that's good news. So, if we wanted to just bump it up to 1 for our shutter, then we, don't have to sacrifice much of our render time. So we can see here it is with the slot 2, and then if we change this to slot 1, you can see what happens with those. It kind of like, they kind of shrink in their trails a little bit. And if I hit J, I can actually go between the two and compare them. And if you had more, and you can see the faster these things move, the longer the trails are. So I'm just hitting J here. So you can see that some of these are moving quite a bit faster, and some of them are a little bit slower. So the slower they are, the more they're going to look like these guys, and the faster they're going to look like that. And if you had a whole bunch of them in here, if you had like 15, you'll have to remember which one which one each slot is. But you can see here that this looks pretty cool, but I actually prefer, I think, this slot 1 0.5 setting. So I think we're going to go with that. And I will tell you that one thing that I did was way back in the day when I really had to be careful with how much time I was spending on each frame. I would have like maybe 4 or 5 slots, and I would write down all of my settings because I was changing like light paths, I was changing smoke settings, all that kind of stuff for comparisons and everything, and I need to know which one I actually wanted to go with. So, you know, and this has to go like, if you're changing your lighting and everything else, that this also helps out too. So, using this method is great for doing some tests and just getting a section. So let's go ahead and close this. I think we're pretty much ready to make these our final settings. So I'm going to change the shutter to a zero point 0.5. And for the light paths, we're just going to keep it as it is. I'm not going to do a whole bunch of comparisons on um, your noise or the volume settings because that can take a little bit of time, and it's not worth it in my opinion to really do that. It just assume that what I'm saying is right, but you can always do your own tests and see what you can get away with if you want to drop this down more and increase your step rates or whatever. We're just going to keep this as it is. Let's go to our output properties and keep this at 200, and we'll just move this over here like this, and we'll move this over here like this, and we'll just sort of set these back up where they were. And I like keeping, because I could just turn off the render region, but it is nice to have this selected when you're doing some, viewport render views, because it only renders that section there. Okay, so that looks pretty good. Now we could, if you want to, we could add a depth of field, and I'll show you quickly how we can do that. So I'll go here to a 3D viewport, and it might get a little bit slow here. So let's bring this up over the top. Let's actually hit 7. And there's our camera. I'm going to turn on the overlays here. And we can click depth of field, focus object. We can actually, choose an object here or use distance. And we're just going to select the, let's do the smoke domain. So we set on the smoke domain, And then if we take the f-stop, which is right down here, and we drop this down to like a 1 or lower, you'll start to see a depth of field look. And it's not going to be as noticeable from this angle. That's why I wasn't really suggesting to do it. If you change your camera angle to go over here and do a really cool like perspective shot, which I do recommend that you play around with different angles, but this is a really nice one for just showing the animation. I mean, if we set this to a 0.1, for example, you can see that it just blurred that line, the back edge there, and there will be parts of this that get a little bit blurry, but really from this angle it doesn't help too much. So we're actually going to turn this off. So let's go to, I'm just going to change this to wireframe here. And we're going to go ahead and render this frame out. And again, for my samples, I'm using 512, and under performance, because I'm using 3.0, there is no tiling that you have to use, but you might have to use tiling if you run out of memory. Okay, so if you have a memory issue, you might have to use tile sizes and you might have to change this value here. Try different sizes for your tiling if you have to use that, but for me, I don't have to. And then for your render, I'm going to say that I'm going to set this to a 200% because usually the stuff that I end up sending is at a 1920 by 1080, so 200% will work just fine. If you find that that takes way too long, change it to a 150 because at least that's a little bit bigger. But don't render it at 1920 by 1080. If you render it at 1920 by 1080, it's just going to look a little bit blurry and it won't have as much detail as you'd like it to be. So definitely up your final render size. And now let's go ahead and render this. Okay, great. So here is our image. It looks pretty good. I don't think I would need any more samples on this because in motion this will look pretty good. And again, it's going to be at about this resolution, so you can see how tight that looks because it's at a rendered at a much higher resolution. So what I'm actually going to do here is I'm going to close this window and we're going to go over to the compositing tab, and that will help save us from all that chugging that it was doing from viewing the Fireball, and we're going to go to the compositing tab, click use nodes, and now we have this set up here. So I'm going to show you very quickly how we can set up a compositing node graph here to make this look pretty good. So we just have our single frame, and you'll need to do the easy viewport that I'm doing. You'll have to go to add-ons and then look for Node Wrangler. Click that on, and then Control Shift left click. You will be able to quickly create a viewer node like this right here, and we can see in our background, we can actually see our image. So I'm going to go over to View, click Fit, and it's going to put it in the background. Now, ideally, you'll have two monitors, and on your other monitor, way over there on the left, I would have a different window. If you go to Window, New, you can set it to your, let's actually just show you how you would do this. So I can go up here, and I can go to Image Editor, and then from there, I can click on Viewer Node. And then whenever I change whatever I'm looking at over here on the node graph, like that, so I'm looking at the alpha channel, you can see that it's now changing, okay? So I'd recommend that you do that if you have two monitors. You should have two monitors. Two monitors, I would say, is a better purchase than buying a graphics card right now because two monitors will increase your ability to create by like a lot. So let's just get rid of that and just assume that this normally I would have another window open. And we're just going to do some things here. So what we'll want to do is I'm going to show you kind of how to set this up for a single image, just a single image render of a PNG, but I'm also going to show you how to set this up so that you can throw this into a compositing program like Natron or like DaVinci Resolve, which I'm going to be showing in a demo of DaVinci Resolve and using Fusion on how to basically use EXR files to create a very professional VFX clip or shot or render of your animation. But that will be at a later date, so you'll have to wait a little bit on that. But if we go in here, and what we're going to do first is we are going to composite. So we're going to go to Shift A to add color, and then a mix node like this. And you're going to take your image, put it in the bottom one, and then let's go ahead and look through there. And you can see that now we have what looks like just black. Okay, so what happens is if we have an alpha channel and we click this right here, we can use the alpha for the background, and you can see that now I have changed that to an orange, or you can change it to red or whatever color you want, but I want black. So I'm going to change that to a black color. Now you have your, your wall here that has this fire and smoke simulation, and then the black background that we wanted before. So that's pretty cool. And these steps that I'm showing you, in a lot of programs, this mix node would be called a merge node, or you would take a color, like an RGB value, and you'd put it into a merge node that would basically do the exact same thing here. So the principles that are being shown in this compositor are very similar to a lot of other programs. Okay, so you can kind of take the ideas here, and even if you don't know a software, you can take the concepts and use it there. So this does help. We're not going to clamp the values. Clamping will basically take our color values and it will clamp them to a 0 to a 1 value, but we actually want things above a 1 because we're going to add, with Shift a filter, and we're of course going to add a glare node because everyone likes to have the glowy, 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 wonderful things like that. So to make this easier to see, we're just going to look at what's called the glow map. So if we take the mix right here and we move it all the way over to 1, so you can type that in or just left click and drag to the right, that's our glow map. Okay, so those are the areas that we're actually seeing having the glow. So if we change this from streaks to a fog glow, it's a little bit more of what you would expect to see. It's kind of like a bloom effect where it takes the bright values and it pushes them out. And you can see right here where it says threshold, it says 1. Watch what happens when I click this clamp. It's gone, okay? And if I take the threshold and I move it down, we're going to start to see more of those values come in. So that's what clamp does. We don't want that, okay? Because we want those extra values to make our really cool glowing effect here. And we can actually change this threshold. If we increase it, we're basically saying everything above that value, we only want to make that glow. So that's going to kind of be up to you on what you want. And for the size, we're going to pop this up to a 9 to make it even more glowy. And if you have this at low, it will be a lot faster. And sometimes I use this on the final because the higher glow value and the fastness of this render for a animation or something like that, I sometimes prefer. But I'm going to change this to high for now. And it's going to get tighter. It's going to have a lot more sort of like high quality glow effect there. And then if we take the mix and change it to a 0, it will mix. Basically, it's going to take our glow effect and it's going to add it over the top. Okay, kind of like that there. And you can see that it's this like, this reddish color here. And you could go in and separate this out and make it a little bit different if you wanted to. But I am going to take this and move it to a threshold of 1, which is going to be more. It's just going to add more to it, and you'll see that like outline and stuff. So that kind of looks cool. It does kind of look like it's a little bit too red here. And you could take this and we could go and take a color mix, put just our glow map. So if we take this and take the threshold and move, or sorry, the mix to a 1, so that, let's actually change this to a low so it's faster so I can show you what I'm doing. So if we take that and put that right in here, and then we take this and put it here, and then we can take this mix instead and change this to an add, and you can see there that it's added over the top. Okay, that's basically what we were doing here. But now we can take this and we can put a, let's put a color ramp in here, and you can see there now it's white, so we can actually control the color. So you could change this to a yellow. See that there? So it's more yellow. You can make it pink if that's what you want. Or take a color correction, take this and put it into there. And then take this and put it into here. And we can take the saturation master right here and pop this down. See that? So there's all sorts of stuff you can do by just taking the glow map only and altering the colors. okay? And then using a mix add, which will then change the way that it's being created for your glow map, okay? So for me, though, I'm just going to use this view through here, and we're just going to knock the mix back by putting a negative value. So negative -0 0.5, maybe a negative -0.85. That's a little bit too much. 6.5. Maybe something like that will be okay for now. Okay. So we have that, and we can change this to a medium or a high to then tighten that up. But I'm just going to leave it on low for now to make it a lot faster, because the next thing that we're going to do to add to our node graph here is we're going to add a color balance node. And what this does, I'm just going to move this over here. It basically takes your lift, gamma, and gain, and if you just hover over it, tells you exactly what everything does here. Okay, so lift is for shadows, the gamma is for the midtones, and the gain right here is for the highlights. And we're going to just sort of color what's called basically coloring our film. Okay, and we're going to, what I always like to do is take the gamma here and just sort of bring this down, because this is going to increase the overall contrast. Take the lift and pull it up a bit, and this will make more of a grayish value for our blacks. So we're going to pull that up a bit. And then for the gain, we're just going to pull that up a bit as well. And let's bring this down a little bit more. This is all visual for now. I'm not going to show how to use a chart to do all this. Normally I would have basically some charts open that will actually help guide me on this, but we're just doing this visually for now. And once you've created sort of a different contrast, you can see it's more gray in the background and it's just a little bit more film-like. We can then go here to these color wheels right here, and we can actually shift, left click, select, and pull these around. And if you go way into different directions, you can see that now we're coloring the entire film. So if we want it to be a little bit more cooled down, you can bring it up there like that, and it has this nice sort of bluish look for our, as it says right here, for the shadows. Then for the gamma here, you can bring it into a different direction. Maybe you want it to be more warm, so now all of this stuff is a little bit more warm. And then we can cool it down a little bit more by taking the gain, or the highlights, and you can cool that down as well. And you can kind of what I like to do is pull it into a, like, extreme direction, and then bring it back down a little bit to see what it will end up looking like. Maybe something like that. So just to show you the difference, if we go to the glare node here, it looks like that. Then to the color balance node, it looks like that. So it's got a little bit more of a film-like look to it, and it's got a little bit more contrast. So then if you want, you can throw in a color correction node, and then you can take all of the master, the highlights, the midtones, everything else, and change the gamma, gain, lift, contrast, everything else. But I like to just take the master and just knock it down a little bit in the saturation. Maybe 0.98, something like that. That's a little bit too much still, so maybe 0.975. So takes out some of that yellow there and just makes it a little bit whiter. So again, a difference between, so here's what it looks like that, actually, let's go back here. Without any color correction, that's what it looks like. Okay. And then if we do it with the color correction, it looks like that. All right. So pretty vast difference in how you can tone the overall image. Then from here, what you'll want to do, if you're running this as a animation, you want to do all your compositing in here, and you like this, you're going to take this output, put it into your image. Then for your alpha, just keep it as a 1 because you're not using any alpha channels. And the Z value, don't worry about that because you're not going to be using that as well, because you're basically doing what's called baking out everything in your scene just like this. Okay? So this is basically going to be the final image for everything. And if we go and we open up a new window and we go to the image editor and we go to the either viewer node or the render result, or actually not the render result, you'll need your viewer node here, and make sure that the viewer node is going through the actual end of your node. For a composite, once this renders out, it will automatically use this. So make sure that you do this at the end where you make the composite your actual end image, because I've accidentally forgotten to do that many, many times because I'm only using the viewer node usually. So if we go here, we'll go to image, save as, go to, let's make a new folder and we'll call this tutorial renders, but you can call it whatever you'd like. And let's call this Fireball 1. Take the compression down because I don't like the compression. And for color bit depth, keep it as 8. And we're going to say this is a PNG just to keep the image quality higher. Okay, so save as PNG. And if this is all you were doing, you just wanted this image or a couple like this that you were doing single images of, that is how you would do it. Now, if you were doing this for a full animation, you need to go to your render properties, or the output properties here. Let's open this up a little bit more. See where it says output? Click this folder, and you're going to navigate to your folder, which I will create a new folder that's called animation renders, or animation, I guess. Animation. Go in there, make a new folder, and we're going to name this PNG, and double click on that. And then down here, what we'll do is call this fireball _1 dot, and then we're going to do a frame padding. So 1, 2, 3, 4 number signs or hashtags, whatever you want to call them. And you're going to call this at the end here .png and accept that. And what that's going to do is every frame will say fireball _1 dot, and then it's going to have 4 frames or 4 digits for padding, and then have a .png. So that helps you when you're running multiple sequences. And if you're working with a client, usually they'll tell you what the frame padding is going to be. I think on VFX it's usually 4 because they'll put this into film reels and stuff like that, but it depends on who you're working with. Then right down here, we're going to change the file format. Well, we're not going to change it. We're going to keep it PNG. And then 8-bit color depth. Take the compression down because I don't like any compression on my raw files. And then from there, you would save your file and then render the animation. Okay? And you would sit back for a few days while that renders, most likely. Now, if you are trying to create something that is going to be used to composite later, so all this stuff that I did here is going to be done in a compositing program, and all you're trying to send out is just a raw render of your background. What you will do is you will actually just take your image here and your alpha like this right into the composite, and you're not going to do anything else. Okay, now you could take the depth and do this here, but really you don't need any depth for this scene because, I mean, you're most likely not going to do anything with it. You could take this and throw it into there and save it out as an EXR with a depth file or a depth channel, but really it's not a big deal. I wouldn't really worry about this part, but let's leave it there anyway. So what we'll do here, instead of the PNG, if we go out, we're going to call this a EXR. Okay, and we're going to go in there and we're going to change this to a .exr. Now in EXR, if we go here and we change this, you can go to all of these different things. So you can see here, Open EXR. And an Open EXR has all sorts of things. It actually is a 32-bit color channel. So these are huge files, all right? And you need to understand that before you do it, because if you are rendering this out and you don't have enough space on your computer, these can be huge files, okay? Especially 4K, 6K, or 8K files, they're gigantic, all right? So just keep that in mind. But here you're going to see color, we want RGBA, so that's red, green, blue, and alpha channel. Here it says float half, float full, we want the full quality. We're not going to do a lossless, we're just going to click none here for the codec, okay? And you could pick one of these. You could do the zip lossless if you want, but we're just going to pick none. Z buffer, basically that allows you to save a Z depth. So if you're doing Z depth, you can click this and then save your file. And you will be rendering out an EXR file sequence, or a sequence of EXRs, which will basically look like this here. Okay? So it's going to have your alpha channel, it's going to have your Z depth, which you can't see here because you actually have to use some nodes to set that up, but I'm not going to go into that right now. But you can look at the image, you can look at the alpha, and it's going to have all of the color channel information that you're using for your mix, glare, color balance, color correction, all this stuff down here is all being done, or all can be done with this render here, because your rendering outside of Blender is a really, really high color bit depth file. And that's why it takes a while to, run it through some of these things. And that's why your glare node, you can pull such high values out of it, is because it has a lot more than a PNG or a JPEG color value would allow. Okay. So that's going to be it for this series. I will be adding a couple different videos, like how to render in some different render engines for this tutorial. I'm also going to be doing that tutorial on how to use DaVinci Resolve, their Fusion compositing system, to make your animation in there instead of doing all of your compositing through Blender. But that's going to be a little bit of a later date. So I hope you all have a really good time making these fireball simulations. I really tried to make it as simple and straightforward and easy to do as possible. And I really look forward to hearing some feedback from you all on how you did and how you like this, and if you were able to follow along well and get a really nice result. So thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you all next time on DJ Tutorials.